Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Orchestrating Hybrid Cloud and Multi-Cloud Security Services webinar. My name is Dan Sullivan. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect here at Itential. I've been with Itential for about 4 years. I've been working in customer-facing pre- and post-sales roles, focused on automation for about the past 12 years or so. And my background is largely in software development, distributed systems, and automation. Here at Itential, I work with a number of financial institutions, banks, healthcare providers, as well as a lot of other, large enterprise and service provider customers. And every time I speak with them, really security is top of mind. And these days, right, securing large organizations and networks isn't really getting any easier. In fact, it's getting harder every day. Security is way more than just a single firewall like it used to be, right? Most organizations are hybrid in nature. They have data centers, multi-cloud deployments, so whether it's AWS, Azure, or GCP, or multiple clouds. And security is always a concern, and most organizations, they're even using SD-WAN solutions. They have on-premise firewalls, cloud-based firewalls, security platforms like Zscaler. And really managing security for these environments really almost necessitates an orchestrated solution. And so today's webinar will kind of focus on how an orchestrated solution can help navigate some of these complex environments. And we have a little bit of a demo we'll kind of walk through to get that point across. And we'll first, before we get into the demo, just got a couple of slides to kind of set the stage as to what we're going to cover. And again, hey, security is just not confined to that old on-prem firewall, right? There's virtual firewalls, security groups and network ACLs, your data center firewalls. All of this apparatus really needs to function together, right, to provide security across your entire network. And your entire organization, for that matter, and a single, a single vulnerability with one of these systems affects the entire network. So for today, we'll have a little bit of a demo that we'll kind of walk through in detail about how you can use an orchestrator like the Itential automation platform to actually help coordinate all these disparate security systems that you have. We have a couple of examples for today. We'll just focus on AWS and Palo Alto Panorama for today. But throughout the demo, hopefully you can see how you could easily extend this to other security solutions that you might have deployed in your environment. It just gives you an idea about what's possible. So what we'll do is we will have a demo about basically IP blocking. So we have a number of customers who are constantly being attacked. And when they discover a malicious IP address or even a network, they need to stop access to that network or from that network across all their domains. So if it's discovered in AWS, it's no less important to block it on Palo Alto and vice versa, right? And for customers that have even more security infrastructure than what we have in a little demo here, the problem is actually exacerbated. And so we'll give a little bit of an example as to how we do this today. All right, so what I'm going to do now is just share my screen and we'll sort of get into this. So let's see here. So to start with, let me see here, I'm going to go to, once I log into Itential, you'll see here that I actually have this IP address blocking implemented as an Itential project. So I'm just going to click into it for a second here, see what I'm saying here. And now what you'll notice is I have a number of folders here. So I just have kind of all the assets that I'm using in today's demo. And I'll kind of go through this because at the base of the project, all we're really trying to do is block access to some sort of a malicious IP or a network across the two network assets that we have today, which are AWS and Panorama. So let me just click in here. So you'll see the block and unblock. That's really kind of the foundation of what we're doing. And you'll see here that we have also a folder for Panorama. And if I click on that, you'll see the block IP workflow show up here. And in my case here for Panorama, what I'm going to do is basically every time I get a request to block a particular address or network, I'm going to actually create an address within Panorama. And I'm going to create that address with a specific tag. So you'll see here that the second block in this workflow is just that create call. You'll see, you can't really see here, but I've got a little payload, and I'll actually create an address by making an API call to Panorama, and I'll create it with a specific tag. So I have a dynamic address group configured. So I'm merely just trying to add addresses to a dynamic address group. And then the idea would be that I would have a block policy configured on that particular address group. Now, of course, there's multiple ways to solve this particular problem with Panorama or other technology, but the idea here is that you figure out what it takes to implement security the way that you want when you have a block, and you just drag and drop those API calls on the screen and build a workflow. You'll notice here the last bubble here is just some context. So basically, we're going to save some information so that later on, if we want to delete that address, we know what to delete exactly. Now, if we look at AWS, there was a similar thing. For AWS, we're going to focus on a particular VPC, and we'll create network ACLs, right? So in our case here, we'll read the ACLs, figure out the last ACL, the last rule used, and then we'll create our new ACL entry with the appropriate rule. And we'll also save some context. Basically, we'll save the rule number. We'll return the rule number from the workflow so that we have some context about how later on we might want to actually delete that if we wanted to. But of course, in general, all these workflows are fire and forget, right? They don't really save any state. Once they run, they're done, right? They don't have any. Other than maybe from an auditing perspective, you can view the workflow data and see what happened, who did what. But in terms of actually maintaining any information, they don't really do that. So what we're going to do then is also have a top-level workflow called block IP. And that IP, that workflow simply just calls the same block IP address workflow, and then it does the same thing for AWS, right? You can see again, we're going to save some context information, and that'll become relevant in just a bit. I'll sort of explain why we're going through this process. And you could see here, if you had yet another infrastructure, you had Zscaler or an SD-WAN solution, you just add another block and unblock prefix workflow for those particular technologies. You could just stitch them in here, and now you'd have a solution that actually spans across your infrastructure. And again, it's not so important about how we're doing it. It's more important about how we can stitch all this together, really. So now we have this top-level workflow that will block a prefix. We have a similar one for unblocking. Not really necessary to probably take a look at that, but you get the idea. But we have two sort of stateless workflows here. They block and they unblock. But what we might want to do is we might actually want to save some of this state. And so why is that even useful? Well, so for example, today, a lot of the customers that I talk to, it's not only important to be able to block something, but there's usually audit requirements to be able to say why you did it, when you did it, and who did it. And I might want to access that information dynamically. And so for that purpose, we're actually going to introduce what we call the Itential Lifecycle Manager. The Lifecycle Manager will actually interface to these block and unblock workflows. And what will happen is the Lifecycle Manager will actually allow us to save some state. And now we'll have a running record of what prefixes or hosts we've blocked as part of our service. So if I go over to Lifecycle Manager, what you will see here is that here's some instances that have already been blocked, but I'm going to start over here in this first tab, which is the model. So we have basically, we've expressed our model for this particular service in JSON schema. I won't get into it too much, but you'll see here there's a property called IP prefix. And that's simply the prefix that we're blocking. We'll have a start time as to when we actually initiated the block. And this will actually be filled in by those workflows themselves. We don't necessarily need to specify that. The other piece of input we might want to specify is the block duration. How long do we want to block a particular prefix? And then we have some context information. That's largely what we talked about before. So in this particular case, we'll save some context information from Panorama and AWS so that at some point in time we can go back, we can go out and actually remove that from the network. So now we have sort of a stateful representation of those block and unblock actions that we were looking at prior to this. Now, once you have this model, the way that it connects to those workflows is via these actions. I'm going to click on this Actions tab, and you'll see for the particular model that we have two actions filled out. We have a delete and a create, and the create does the block, and the delete does the unblock. And so if we jump back into here, we can see our LCM workflows that we're calling the create, and all the create does is call that block IP job that will in turn block a prefix on AWS and Panorama. And then the other thing that's a little bit different about these workflows is that they take a specific format of input. So the model, the instance data, that model that we specified is provided as input to us. And then at the end of the workflow, we will save state and we'll save data back into that model so we can update the instance data for each particular model. So each particular instance will have a unique set of data saved to it. And so that's really the idea here is we've taken this stateful representation, defined a model, and we've applied it to some existing sort of stateless workflows that we've created. We made a little bit of, we did a little bit of work because we're going to save some context so that we can clean these up and unblock them when we need to. But by and large, pretty straightforward mapping between the model itself and these stateless workflows. And so now if I click on instances, I can start to see I already have some prefixes blocked, and they're pretty straightforward. So if I click on one of these here, I can actually go over and click on properties, and it again will show that here's the prefix that's been blocked, and I'll use that same prefix as the instance name. And I'll sort of explain why I did that in a bit. And you'll see the block start time, the duration, which is 10 days here, and the name of the IP address we created in Panorama so that I could go back and remove it if I want. And then the rule for the inbound and outbound security rules that we created in AWS. So we have both of those saved. So now we have enough information that we can go back and delete this and clean it up. And also, we have all of this existing data that we can access, and we can use this to basically tell inform other systems about, hey, what's blocked and how long it will be blocked for. So I can actually, if we want, can actually create an instance to block directly from here, right? So if I create a new instance here. Okay, so now we can actually configure an instance directly from the LCM environment if we want. So I can pick a prefix here and try to block it. So let's see. Usually I want to save it as the name, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to pass it in as prefix, and I'll just hit save. And we should see that here with the timestamp 11:26, so it looks like it's running. So we can click on that, and it looks like it's already completed. So now if I click on properties, you'll see that it's gone out, configured that group in Panorama and that address rule. So if we went into Panorama here, and did a refresh, we should be able to see that. So let's try this again, and we'll go to that particular VPN. So I've got a specific VPC that I'm using for this. And so let's see here. So you'll see the 209 address is indeed that address that we just blocked. And we should go, if we go to Panorama, we should see that same thing, that same prefix get added. So, yep, so it's also been added here in Panorama. Should show up on the screen in just a second. And through these Panorama warnings. And it looks like it showed up here as well. So we've been able to successfully block the prefix on both Panorama and AWS. Now, we can also just do this straight from Operations Manager if we wanted. So we can do the same thing from Operations Manager. So I'm just going to jump over here. And here I've got a little bit of a form created here so that I can actually do a blocking, a blocking request here. Now, I also have Operations Manager entry for deleting a service. Now, if you notice here that we have a whole bunch of triggers defined, and what's happening is that as soon as part of that service, not only am I calling the block workflow, but I also am calling another workflow which actually creates a trigger and schedules it. So based on the duration, I'll actually schedule all these prefixes to be deleted. So now I don't have to worry about cleaning it up on it. I don't have to have someone do it manually. I actually have these all scheduled, and they will run at the appropriate time. At this point, the trigger gives the time when it's going to run. Maybe this doesn't work. So you could always go back to the workflow and add a specific time when you can actually make a network change so that it occurs during a maintenance window. But you can set the triggers any way that you want. So it's just a little bit of an example of how we can leverage some of that stateful data we have and actually schedule the delete. But again, I can do the same thing on the service create if I want. So from Operations Manager, if I just run this this manual thing, in this case, I just put the prefix in, and I can hit the run button. It'll go off. Oh, let's go about this. That wasn't good. That looks better. So the form itself is catching me. If I have a typo in the entry, then the form will give me a hard time, and that's exactly what happened. That time it took it, and again, it's going to go off. It's calling the LCM action, and looks like the action ran successfully. Again, we blocked another IP address, so that's pretty interesting. And we can do the same thing for delete. So if I were to click on the, if I go back to the automations here and click on the delete, if I run the manual change here, down here, so there's 2 pages of these, but if I had the manual trigger right here and run that, it's going to give me a form, and it's going to ask. And in this case, I can only select one of the specific blocks that I have. So this is one I know I have configured, so I can just run this, and it will go off and should go off and unblock this for me. You see the same thing. The action that ran pretty quick, so it looked like it already deleted it. So I should be good to go. So now we've kind of we've been able to block and unblock IP addresses. We have a couple of examples of us doing that. But really, one of the other powerful parts of Lifecycle Manager is our ability to actually leverage some of this data. So the interesting part here is that this data is kind of useful, right? Because now we have an active records that tell us how, tell us what's blocked. So really the idea here would be that what could we do with this? How could we leverage it? And so for today's demo, what I've actually done is written a small Python script that will read the existing LCM instances via an API call. Now, you might ask, hey, you have an orchestrator there. Why didn't you just do the work within Itential? And the reason is if we have enough prefixes blocked, if we have several thousand of these blocked, Itential doesn't necessarily Itential doesn't necessarily have the ability to do overlapping checks and to see if a host is contained within a particular network or anything like that. And that's better done in Python. There's a lot of open source modules that do that, so we can pretty easily do it in Python. And we'll want the Python script to actually use the API call because it could be a lot of data and it'll be really hard. While we can call the Python script from a workflow in Itential, what we don't want to do is pass it a huge amount of data. That might be prohibitive. So we're going to actually have a Python script that will actually read the LCM instance data. So you can see here, I've got a little bit of a Python class written to get the appropriate OAuth 2 session going, and then it's just going to make a few API calls into Itential to download the instances, and then lastly run some network checks using some publicly available Python modules to do it. And you can see down here where we'll go and do that check to check the prefix, but you'll also notice, if you're familiar with Python at all, the script itself is going to emit a little bit of JSON data. That's primarily because the output of the script, typically you write scripts, the output of them can be for a human to read. In this case, we wanted to make it more machine readable, so outputting a JSON string makes it a little bit easier for us to parse back in Itential. If I take a look back in Automation Studio, you'll see here that we have this verify workflow set up here, and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So that verify workflow basically will take a few parameters from the form, and then it's going to call that same script that we just looked at. It's going to take the output of that script, convert it into JSON data, and then we're going to go off and figure out if it's blocked, we'll get information about the blocking instance. If not, we'll just send an email saying that it's unblocked. So now we are going to actually have a service that can, sort of a self-service model. So if someone's having reachability problems, they could actually query to see if their prefix is blocked, and it will give us an indication of whether it's blocked across all of the infrastructure. So and something like this, we can certainly just run from Operations Manager. You'll see the verify workflow here, and the Operations Manager entry, and I can just run it here. And I can put in a prefix and see what happens here. So we'll try this one first. Okay, that looks pretty good. And we're going to go off and run that script, and it looks like it ran pretty quickly. And if you just hear that ding, looks like it sent me that email. So that was my name in the email. So let's see here. Just wait a second and see if we got that email. Okay, so now we can see that we got that blocking verification email. So, and in this case, this particular prefix is overlapped or blocked by this particular entry in our environment. So that's pretty good. So we could do and you could do the same thing to unblock uh, or for even if it's not blocked, you'll get a different response back. So now what we've done here, and we can take, we've actually been able to build uh, a model using LCM. We can track the active instances we have. We can leverage that data easily now and make use of the fact that we have a stateful representation of what's actually going on in our network. And we saved enough context so that we can orchestrate the blocking and, more importantly, the unblocking when we no longer need it. And the other interesting thing that you get from Lifecycle Manager is you get a historical representation of what's happening. So although I'm only showing active instances, you can also have the deleted ones shown. So anything that's been deleted, you'll also be able to see the record. So if you click on the deleted one here, you'll notice here for the deleted ones, the context is zeroed out. So you know that there's no active resources being held by this deleted, by a deleted entry, which is what you would expect. So you have a pretty good history on everything that ran and when it ran. And now you have the ability to tie distinct actions you took and provide an auditable way to track that. And more importantly, you have an orchestrated way to touch the different resources within your network. And while you may have a better way to do blocking, or you may be using Azure instead of AWS, you can certainly see where just sort of adding workflows and kind of building this out. It's a pretty simple thing to do. It took a couple of days to build it. So it's not like it took all that long to get something like this up and running. And that's what I have today. So certainly if you have any questions, reach out to us at Itential, and thanks for tuning in and listening.